Welcome back to the next Fireside Chat. My name is Kevin Hill, the executive publisher here at FreightWaves. And right now I have a special guest from FourKites. It's Glenn Koepke. He's the Senior Vice President of Customer Success at FourKites. And we're going to talk about visibility and why visibility is so much different when it comes to pharma and healthcare than just about any other type of industry or commodity out there. Welcome to this Fireside Chat, Glenn. How is it going?
Thanks for having me. Things are going well. Never a dull moment in 2021, but things are going great. So appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's a continuation of 2020, and we're going to talk about that with pharma and healthcare today. But first, can you give us a little bit of background about yourself and FourKites?
Sure. So I'll start with FourKites. So FourKites is a leader in the supply chain visibility space. Was founded about 6 years ago with the concept of, where's my truck? Right. Ultimately, the value of goods inside of a truck or a container are quite high. And, whether you call it the Amazon effect or just the overall consumer focus on, the estimated time of arrival, you see it in the manufacturing and supply chain world. And so FourKites aim to understand initially with truckload in the US where goods are at any point in time. And then since then, we've had a lot of great growth. So super passionate customer base. Really fun group of folks to work with, and we've expanded to all modes of the region, all modes of the world, and all regions of the world as well. So work with a number of the leading shippers and manufacturers in the world, as well as logistics service providers, as well as distribution companies as well. So quite fortunate to have our customer base. And then in terms of my background, I've been in the logistics industry for about 20 years. So cut my teeth on the operations side of things. Worked in the TMS industry, did some supply chain consulting, spent some time in Europe as well. So I was fortunate to do a startup based in the Netherlands and travel the world. So I've been, I think I'm counting it, 52 countries, deploying logistics and supply chain solutions all across the world. And, it's fun to work everything from CSCO down to the shipping clerk and everything in between. So it's really been a great adventure thus far.
Definitely, it sounds like you've been around the block a few times, around the globe a few times as well. We're talking about FourKites and their customer base. Part of that's in pharma and healthcare, and you have to strive to meet those visibility demands. You mentioned high value cargo. Certainly, pharma and healthcare fits into that box, but there's many other boxes that pharma and healthcare fit into that require a heightened sense of visibility. Can you give some scenarios on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a broad category, right? Like what fits into pharma and healthcare. You think of your, drugs that are sold at retail stores. Obviously, with COVID going on, vaccinations are a part of it. But you also have many other kind of goods that fall into that, like in the med device space, right? So, for example, if you have sleep apnea, I need a CPAP device, right? These are things that all fit into the pharma, healthcare, med device space, life sciences as well. And so, the common theme in here is one is just sensitivity to the consumer, right? And so that's really a key theme that we hear in this supply chain segment. But just the value and kind of what's really at stake is so critical to these companies. And so, where visibility is really key and crucial to these companies is that chain of command. Right. So when I say chain of command is when you're moving from your supply raw material suppliers through manufacturing, through quality, through distribution to the end customer, you have to make sure that all the links in the supply chain are clean, and that if there's any risk for exposure, contamination, theft, that there are mitigation plans in place. And so when you look at this segment of the industry, visibility is at the core of what they've been trying to do for a number of years.
So when we talk about visibility, what are some of the more specific requirements that this sector requires than maybe your retail, CPG, or most any other sector? What are some of those heightened specific requirements that you need companies like FourKites to actually supply?
Yeah, so first is just the magnitude, right? When you think of like sensitivity and what's at stake. I mean, you may have a shipment, a truck, right, an air freight shipment or a small parcel package that the value could be up to $100 million, right? So what you see here is just the aspect of IoT-based devices, right? So there's a number of hardware-based companies that have been involved in this type of supply chain to make sure that anything that's in transit is closely monitored. Typically, what you see is if there's high value or risk of theft, you'll also see security drivers that will move along with the transit. So depending on sensitivity, you may have security companies that will follow along for the first 250 miles in the last 250 miles, depending on the value of the product and the sensitivity of the product. So sensor tracking and this IoT-based concept that a lot of companies have been talking about for a while has been commonplace in this segment, less so in other industries because the value of the goods is slightly different. And then the focus on quality, right? I think for those that come from a manufacturing background or a Lean Six Sigma background, quality is there, but not necessarily in the logistics space. Like when I think of those that are in food and bev and CPG, this idea of a quality management system and true quality assurance all the way to the end consumer just doesn't exist on the transaction level of what it does within pharma, life sciences, and healthcare. And so companies really need to make sure that there are no breakpoints and that you're not just throwing things against the wall and you're hoping to find what sticks. That just isn't acceptable practice in these industries.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, there's the high value component to it, the time sensitivity. There's also the delicate nature of certainly pharmaceuticals. They can't get too hot, they can't get too cold. We all hear that now with the vaccine distribution, but that's for all pharmaceuticals. If you take healthcare equipment, the machinery and kind of technology for hospitals, those are very fragile pieces of equipment as well. So, what are some of the more finer points to having visibility and also measuring the conditions with that visibility as well?
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point of like network planning, which is something I didn't talk about before. But if you think about if you've got a product that's got a 7-day life cycle, right, that it can exist in transit with the packaging requirements that it has. These companies are working very closely with the transport providers. Whether it's a DHL, a FedEx, a UPS on the small parcel side, the international air freight carriers, or perhaps the inland carrier. So there's a very close knit network planning exercise that goes on. And so where visibility ties into that. So if you think about if I'm a US manufacturer and I'm shipping goods to, say, South Africa, right? I may have plan my network around a 5-day transit. And all of a sudden, the threshold of that product could be 6 days. So if I have greater than 1 day of delay in my network, I need to have a quality control process to make sure that we're determining what happens with that package. And so what we see on the visibility side is, all the way down to the mode and the transit day, that if there is an exception, there is clearly a white glove process that goes on if things are potentially awry based on what the planned versus actual was, right? And so, for many companies, many industries, we do a lot of planning at the lane level, but in this case, we're doing a lot of planning at the lane and product level. And on a case-by-case basis, there are deviations on a daily standpoint that come up. And so this idea of like these network command centers are very common within this segment, because you have to have a set group of resources to first understand and diagnose where my errors are, right? So if you think about where visibility tools come into play, it's that proactive alerting, right? I need to take action before it's too late, number one. Two, for anything that's a deviation, there's got to be clear kind of standard work instructions. And so that's where those central operations teams tend to take effect. And then they'll work with the local distributors or local providers of either what the return process will be like if things are fall out of threshold, or a way to destroy the product. And so that whole concept of network planning is at the core of visibility for this segment.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. That the core of network planning is that visibility, being able to be adaptable. I mean, how important is adaptability and flexibility built into to being able to have visibility into that network?
Yeah, I think the word I always hear is like grit in supply chain, right? Like what separates supply chain folks from other just professions is just this grit and resilience and agility, right? If there's three words that I love, like team building games, I love any contest. And I think what always separates supply chain folks out from those in other professions, right? Grit, agility, resilience. And so I think those apply to all industries within supply chain, but specifically, the ability to respond to what's going on in a moment, right? So if all of a sudden there's an airport strike or an airport delay and you have freight that's on an incoming aircraft, you absolutely have to be responsive to that, right? This idea of like, well, hope is going to be the plan just doesn't work for this vertical. And so, absolutely, those contingencies are built in. Disruptions do happen, though, right? I mean, yes, we can predict the Northeast is going to get snow. Did we think it was going to be 16 inches? And do we know that a month ago? No. And so there's got to be resiliency put into the supply chain from a process and tooling perspective. And so one of the things that is common with pharma, life sciences, others is there's just a lot of tools that are out there, right? When I think of the food and bev world, the CPG world, the pharma world, one of the constant challenges you hear from the end users is like, gosh, I got a lot of tools in the toolkit, right? Which one do I use? And one of the things that we see and we advise on is you have to make sure that there's deep integration back into your core execution systems. So for those that are on the front line, you're not giving them 5 options to choose from, right? There's one toolkit, there's standard operating procedures, and it's quick and it's as efficient as possible, right? So as we look at the world of visibility, integrating this back into your core execution platforms is so critical to scale visibility from, let's say tens to hundreds of users to thousands to tens of thousands of users within a company across a global enterprise.
That is interesting, that the scalability of it. So looking into the crystal ball and the future of visibility, especially in pharma and healthcare, what are the major trends of the new technologies, maybe, or new capabilities those technologies are bringing for 2021, really for the next 3 to 5 years? Where do you see visibility going in pharma and healthcare?
Yeah, I think, a lot of folks, as a buyer, it's tough to separate, right? So, artificial intelligence and machine learning is often touted across many, many industries, right? And so from a startup to a mid-sized to a late stage company, I think people often, confuse AI and ML. But, what we see and how I look at it is like, how do you augment operations and drive automation? And that way your end user isn't micromanaging all tasks, right? So if I can have my teams at the end user level focus on the 1% instead of the 10%, right? I'm driving towards efficiency. The way we do that is through augmentation of data and process with large data sets, right? So we're able to refine estimated time of arrival within FourKites because we've got a massively dense population across all industries, all modes and regions of the world. So that's one. Two is collaboration, right? When I think of the way collaboration works in the supply chain today is still archaic, right? So if I'm let's say a consumer good product, you order off my website, Kevin, you don't get it, you pick up the phone or you send an email, right? That then triggers another phone call or another email to your supplier. Well, if your supplier didn't get it, it goes to the next supplier in line. And what happens is this general easy question is like, is the truck or the goods going to arrive on time? What we see is it can be 6, 10, 20 emails and phone calls across a day or two to solve a question that should take less than 30 seconds, right? And so, what we see with our customers right now, really the leading customers are investing heavily in collaboration. What does that mean is, I have one platform to actually talk to my end supplier in, I can talk to my end customer in, and I can talk to my transport company in with all in one place, right? So we're eliminating this concept of email to collaboration on a singular transaction. And so first, AI ML is number one. 2, collaboration. 3 is just making sure that there is clear visibility linked back to your execution systems, right? I kind of talked a lot about what other companies are doing with this, but I think those that are early on in their visibility journey, they typically stand up, FourKites or another platform very quickly, right? And then what they start to realize is, gosh, these tools actually have a much broader effect than my planning or execution teams, right? This impacts my commercial teams and it impacts my procurement teams. And so if I can integrate this technology back into my ERP system, I now increase the user base by thousands across my company. And so that continued maturation of the visibility market will continue across the world. So those are really three areas. If I were to bet, what do we see in the next 3 years? Those are three areas that I personally would bet on.
Yeah, I would bet on those too: visibility, data, and also collaboration. We're very far behind in collaboration in supply chain, and pharma and healthcare is no exception to that. Thank you so much for your time today, Glenn. How does our audience reach out and contact you and learn more about FourKites?
So you can always come to our website, FourKites.com. You can also hit me up on LinkedIn, so Glenn Koepke, and always happy to chat further about supply chain strategy, visibility, and where companies are going. So it's a big passion of mine and a big passion of FourKites. So appreciate the time today, and hope everyone stays safe in 2021.
Thank you, Glenn, and stay tuned for our next segment.